If you choose, you can keep the commandments. They will save you. 2 weeks ago, when we read the Beatitudes, I said that if we follow the greatest of all commandments, we would obey all of the 10 commandments and satisfy all of the Beatitudes. Today's gospel is part of the Sermon on the Mount. These sayings will eventually lead to Jesus' crucifixion. When asked which was the greatest commandment, Jesus said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind." The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Today, Jesus teaches us about the 10 commandments. The first 3 deal with our relationship with God. You shall not have strange gods before me. You shall not take the name of the Lord in vain. Remember to keep holy the Lord's day. The next 7 deal with our relationships with each other. Honor your father and your mother. You shall not kill, commit adultery, steal, lie, or covet. Today's gospel tells us to look beneath the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not kill. If you are angry with your brother, you will be liable to judgment. Moses gave us the 10 commandments. Today, Jesus takes 3 of them and uses them as an example. You shall not kill, you shall not commit adultery, and you shall not take oaths. The Israelites needed more precise rules. The Jews used the expression the law in 4 different ways to mean the 10 commandments. They used it to mean the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, which literally means the 5 rules. They used the phrase the law and the prophets to mean the whole of Scripture. And they used the law to mean the oral or the scribal law. They ended up with thousands upon thousands of rules and regulations. They had 600 written laws. For example, the law that said keep holy the Sabbath day. The Jewish legalists needed a more precise definition. When was the Sabbath? At what exact moment did it begin, and when did it end? To keep the Sabbath holy, no work was to be done. But what is work? They were forbidden to carry a burden. What is a burden? They determined that a burden was food equal to a dried fig, ink enough to write 2 letters, and on and on and on. Writing is work, but writing has to be defined. He who writes 2 letters of the alphabet with his right or with his left hand is guilty of violating the Sabbath. You can see why they had so many rules. But we follow 10 rules, the 10 commandments. This should make things simpler, but Jesus says, I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill the law. Even Jesus and his disciples were accused of breaking the law. Jesus' disciples were picking grain on the Sabbath as they walked through the field. That was work. Jesus was guilty of healing the sick on the Sabbath. Again, performing work. Jesus said, man was not made for the Sabbath was made for man. But what must we do to follow these commandments? God never commands what he does not empower us to do. This help is offered to us through grace. Jesus gives us examples to help us. He says 3 times, you have heard that it was said to your ancestors, but I say to you. And then he goes deeper into the commandment. He is asking us to look within ourselves, to look at circumstances within us. He is moving our vision forward. It's the recognition that the choices we make, the words we speak, and the actions we take in the world around us first begin and arise from the world within us. Jesus wants transformation of our hearts more than mere compliance with the law. Our thoughts become ideas, our ideas become our words, and our words become our beliefs. Jesus wants us to go to the root of our actions so as to change our thoughts. If we want to change our behavior, then we have to change our thoughts. We can accomplish this by self-reflection, prayer, or even preparing for the sacrament of reconciliation. It is the transformation of our hearts that begins to change our lives and relationships. He says, you have heard that it was said to your ancestors, you shall not kill, and whoever kills will be liable to judgment. But I say to you, whoever is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. It's not enough to simply restrain from murdering someone. We will be just as liable to judgment if we are angry with a brother or sister. Law enforcement keeps track of the murder rates, and we see it reported on the news. We all want the murder rate to go down. But what would it be like if we tracked the anger rate, if we tracked the fear rate, the resentment rate, the prejudice rate, the grudge rate? How would that affect our lives together? Let me tell you a story. A married couple cared for the wife's ailing father. He was frail and feeble. They also had a small son to care for. They ate their meals at the kitchen table unless there was a big occasion. Every night the old gentleman had trouble eating his meal. He spilled everything, dropped food on the floor, knocked his plate off the table. The husband and wife suffered in silence, but one evening was the last straw. The man did the normal spillings and breakage, but tonight he managed to knock over the tall pitcher of iced tea, soaking everything on the table and splashing sweet tea on all four of them. The next night, they put a small wooden table in the corner of the kitchen with an old bedsheet covering the floor and another one tied around his neck. They gave him a simple wooden bowl with a wooden spoon and dumped his whole meal into the one bowl. The man silently ate his meal. The husband and wife finally had some peace to eat their dinner. This took place several nights in a row. Then one day, as they passed by the living room, they saw their young son playing with some sticks. They asked him what he was doing. He replied, "I am making something." They asked what he was making, and he said, "I am making a wooden bowl so I can feed you guys when you get old." That night, the old gentleman was back at the kitchen table. He still spilled things, but you could detect a small smile at the edge of his lips. I tell this story to ask you if the man and woman sinned in their treatment of the grandfather. And if you think they sinned, which commandment did they break? We probably would all say the fourth commandment, honor your father and your mother. But what about the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill? Did they not kill the man's dignity? Did they not kill the man's spirit? Did they violate the 10th commandment? You shall not desire your neighbor's goods. Did they desire the grandfather of their neighbor, who, although he was 3 years older than theirs, still played golf and traveled all over the world? Did they wish their father was like the neighbor's? I have a small booklet that is a guide to confession. It lists the 10 commandments, but under each is a fuller explanation of what we need to do to avoid breaking this commandment. It says, you shall not have strange gods before me. And then underneath it says, do I seek to love God with all my heart and with all my soul and with all my strength? It says, do I avoid confession? Have I denied a truth of the faith out of concern for the opinion of others? Another one, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. And underneath it says, have I used God's name irreverently? Does OMG mean, oh my goodness? Remember to keep holy the Lord's Day. And it said underneath, do I keep Sunday as a day of prayer, rest, and relaxing? Or is Sunday just another work day? Do I deliberately come late or leave early from Mass without a good reason? And it goes on and on and on. Jesus said, whoever breaks the least of these commandments and teaches others to do so will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. He says, if we speak against our brother, we will be liable to the fiery Gehenna. It says if one of our body parts causes us to sin, we should tear it out and throw it away, because it is better to lose one of our members than have our whole body thrown into Gehenna. Let's go back to our first reading, the reading from Sirach. If you choose, you can keep the commandments. They will save you. If you trust in God, you too shall live. He has set before you fire and water. To whichever you choose, stretch forth your hand. Before man are life and death, good and evil. Whichever he chooses shall be given him. He understands man's every deed. No one does he command to act unjustly. To none does he give license to sin. It says if you choose, you can keep the commandments. They will save you. So it is our choice. We make the choice. We are free to choose life or to choose death. This choice has some good news and some bad news. The good news is that whichever we choose shall be given to us. The bad news is that whichever we choose shall be given to us. Before us is life and death, good and evil, fire and water. God understands man's every deed. No one does he command to act unjustly. To no one does he give license to sin. This is free will. Without free will, we would not need rules or laws or commandments. If you choose, you can keep the commandments.